Hey guys, and welcome back to Betwixt the Books. Today I'm going to do a book review, which is rare. I so rarely get to do this. I usually do a lot of my reviews in chunks where I do a couple of books all at once. It's rare that I have enough to talk about with one book to do a whole video. This one is my first 5-star read of the year, so it's definitely worth it. And today I am going to be talking about The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex. You might have noticed by the beautiful gilded cover here that I have a version of this book that is not the American or North American US edition. If you haven't seen what that cover looks like for the US, this is what the hardcover looked like, and then this is what the paperback looked like. This is the UK edition of the book, which when this book came out, ordered and had shipped to me because this cover is just a million times prettier than that cover is. What's interesting to me is that this is a historical locked room mystery book, and I don't read a lot of mystery or historical books, and yet this one was 5 stars. So let's talk about it. Okay, when it comes to The Lamplighters, the general plot of this one is based on a real event that happened. In December of 1900, there was a lighthouse where all 3 of the lighthouse keepers disappeared. The lighthouse was locked from the inside, and when a ship arrived with a new lighthouse keeper to swap out the lighthouse keeper who had been on this island lighthouse for the longest, they came to discover that there was no one there, despite the fact that the light had been lit the night before. So this mystery book is based on that concept that 3 lighthouse keepers have gone missing, literally overnight or in the morning, and what happened there. The chapters will cycle through perspectives. You'll get each of the lighthouse keepers, Arthur, the primary keeper, Bill, the assistant primary keeper, and Vince, who is a new keeper who is coming here to learn the craft, and he wishes to one day also make it up to assistant lighthouse keeper. And then their wives and girlfriends, so Helen, Arthur's wife, Jenny, Bill's wife, and then Michelle, who is the girlfriend of Vince. The book itself opens up with the relief for Bill, the assistant keeper, being brought out to the lighthouse. When they arrive at the lighthouse, there is no one there to greet them. Usually either the person who is leaving or the primary keeper is there to greet the folks who are coming to the lighthouse. Nobody greets them, so they wind up docking and going up to the lighthouse, find that the door itself is locked. Nobody is answering. Once they are able to get inside, they find that there's nobody there. The place is deserted. All of the clocks were stopped at 9:15. There were 2 different clocks. Both of them were stopped at the same time. The kitchen table has been set for dinner for 2, which is weird because there was 3 lighthouse keepers there physically. They know that the light was shining last night, so somebody had to physically be there to keep the light on during the night. There is an entry into the keeper's log for the weather that there was a huge hurricane level storm, but there wasn't a hurricane level storm that actually happened there. It was storming for the couple of days previously, but it wasn't to the level that would have been kept in the log at that point. And nobody knows what happens. They don't know whether the men fled, whether they're dead, drowned. Nobody knows what happened. And it becomes the crux of the plot, which is what happened to these men. The women are being interviewed for a novel that a author wishes to write about the events that happened to their husbands. So their sections will follow them sort of talking about their relationship with their husbands as well as their relationship with each other, both in the past and in modern day. The novel will go back and forth between giving you a couple of chapters from the lighthouse keepers and then a couple of chapters from the women 20 years later. When it comes to actual plot beats, there is not a lot that happens in this book. It is much more focused on the interpersonal drama between the men, the women, all of them intertwined together, both in the past and in the present of the 1990s. The blurb that's on the cover of this copy by S.J. Watson says that it's a mystery, a love story, and a ghost story all at once. I agree with it being a mystery. It's definitely a mystery. I do also agree somewhat with it being a ghost story because while it may not be a supernatural haunting, a lot of these characters are haunted by several things, actions that they've done, their past, the way that they treated each other, things like that. And then there is, during the ending, a somewhat open-ended supernatural phenomenon, perhaps. I don't want to say what exactly that is because I don't want to spoil it, but there are elements that happen, at least in the section of the story that's following the men, that could be read as ghosts. What I may not agree with so much is that it is a love story. I think that love and marriage and friendship are all definitely themes that this book circles around and discusses, like what it means to love somebody, what happens when that love changes to something that isn't exactly what you want anymore, the way that over the course of a marriage different things happen that can cause two people to grow much further apart. Like all of that is definitely there, but when I think of love story, I'm thinking of like a romance or some element of like the central core thing that this book is focusing on has to do with like love conquering or love being the end all be all, and I don't think that that is necessarily the case for this one. Obviously it is following a bunch of married couples, and there is like love as an idea, and love as something that happens to us is there. I just don't think that it's necessarily what you care about when you're reading this book. It's much more how we treat the people around us, what we can forgive both from other people and from our own actions, things like that. That's much more this focus of what the story is looking at versus like the love between any of the men for the women or vice versa. One of the things that I appreciated about this book is that because we know the like modern day, the 1992 storyline is following a man who's trying to write a novelization of what may have happened in that lighthouse. It is unclear to the reader whether the sections that we're reading from Arthur, Bill, and Vince are really what happened or that writer's novelization of what happened, which again, the writer, doesn't know what happened because the women he's interviewing don't know exactly what happened. They're just giving him bits and pieces of the story that he is then synthesizing into these new chapters. I like to think that it is his story that we are reading, mostly because with each section of interview that we're reading from the women, the following sections from the men are seeding more elements that were given from that interview that we had in the previous couple of chapters. As the author comes to know at least the women's roles in what may have happened, those elements then start popping up in the men's section as well. I feel like this is like a very quiet and slow story, and I'm glad that I read it in the wintertime. I feel like it is like a very not cozy in like comforting sort of way, but like cozy in that it is like a locked room mystery. You're stuck in one spot, much like a lot of us feel like in the wintertime when you're stuck inside and you can't go anywhere. I feel like this book sort of reflected that atmosphere, so it felt correct to read it during the wintertime. As far as the writing quality goes, there were some like interesting quirks. The section by the women are written almost like a transcript of somebody talking at a person who is interviewing them. Not in structure as in like Helen, blah, 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 interviewer, blah, 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 but rather a stream of consciousness. There'll be sections where they're talking and then responding to something as if they had been asked a question in between there, but you don't get to see the question, and there's no quotation marks. Like, you can tell this is something that is being told to someone without it having the structure of that. You can also tell that it is half of a conversation where the questions that are being asked and anything that the author who's interviewing them may have said has been completely removed. You only get what that woman is saying. There are also some chapters interspersed in there that aren't part of the interview, that are those women interacting with other people in their lives. For instance, there are sections where Jenny is talking with her now adult daughter, about what happened back then, these memories being brought up because of the interviews, as well as sections between the women when they're talking to each other about whether or not they should do these interviews, so on and so forth. When it comes to the characters, I feel like because I chose to read the sections written from the men's perspective as the novelization, I viewed those men as reflections of the women themselves. I think that it is like really easy to see the same sort of demeanor and pathology that the women have reflected into their husbands. And if they are sections meant to be a response to what he's hearing of these men from the women, it also makes sense that they would be a reflection of them in that way as well. He only has access to those men through the memories of the women. So Helen and Arthur seemed very proper, very calm, very kind and parental. Bill and Jenny were a little bit unhinged, a lot of bit passionate and compulsive and obsessive in interesting ways. And then Vince and Michelle were young and anxious and wanting to try and find their place in the world, despite having had like such horrible things happen to them that kept knocking them off of the path that they wanted to be on. Despite being reflections of each other, I still did feel like they felt like fully fleshed out human beings with emotions, regrets, wants, and needs. Like all of those things felt very much there. And because we spent so much time with all of these characters sort of like trapped with them and their thoughts, you really got a sense of like what they wanted out of life and the ways that this event came to be and then affected those same dreams. Like the women very much felt to be in a state of arrested development at this point. They weren't able to get past it despite time moving on and things changing. They very much are still stuck waiting for their husbands to come home from the lighthouse. And perhaps it's because they spent so much time away from their husbands to begin with, because they're spending weeks and months out of the year away, that they're not able to get a sense of resolution, especially because they never figured out what actually happened to the men. Like I often do, I did both listen to this book and read it physically at the same time. I would recommend the audiobook. I think it was very well done. It has both a male and a female narrator, so that when it switches between those two perspectives, you get a guy reading for all of the men and a woman reading for all of the women. I feel like this is a great pick for people who like slow, dramatic, interpersonal mysteries with a lot of drama. I think you could hand this to a person who enjoys historical books as well. It isn't a war book and it isn't a romance, which I feel like a lot of like true historical books are. It's definitely a mystery book set in a historical time frame. All in all, I loved it. I felt it was great writing, great characters, an interesting premise, and it lived up to that premise, at least in my opinion. So if you want to try it, I highly recommend it, whether it be audio or physical. That's all for me today, folks. I hope you enjoyed. I will be back next week with something else, and we have a reading roundtable on Friday for you, which is a reading roundtable that is an open theme, so everybody just brought something that they had been reading on their own, but we did discuss a little bit about all of our personal reading goals or bookish resolutions for the year, to varying degrees of like strictness. Some of them were just more open goals, and some of them were much more focused challenges. And you know who's the most focused out of everybody. I will talk to you guys again soon. See you then. Bye.